last thing that we like to talk about, and it's something I talk about with every person that I train, whether I train them privately or I train them in a group, and that is the idea of dog myth busting. Okay, so there are a lot of myths that surround dogs and dog behaviour, and they're quite prevalent in society today. Generally, it's given to you from advice from maybe a family or a friend. It could be just some guy you've met at the dog park who likes to bestow his wisdom upon you. Unfortunately, the myths that we're going to talk about today are prevalent even in media and by so-called experts in the field of dog behaviour. The reality is that what we know about dog behaviour has changed a lot in the last 20 years, but information from 50 or 60 years ago is really still quite prevalent in the way that we talk about dogs. So we want to try and help you overcome some of those myths and start to help you build your relationship with your dog. That's probably the most important thing and why we discuss it. So there are a lot of myths, as we said, surrounding dog behaviour. None is more damaging to the human or owner-dog relationship than the idea of dominance and the idea of being an alpha dog. So, as I said, you probably still hear about these things on television or on the radio, but the reality is that they have actually been scientifically overcome. So, what we have to do first is go back and have a look at a brief history of dog training. So, where did these concepts come from for us to think about them so prevalently in our society today? Well, a brief overview of dog training history shows us that the idea of dominance was actually formed from studies that were performed in zoos in Nazi Germany. So basically they got a bunch of unrelated wild wolves, they forced them to live together, and they began to observe their behaviours. So they were maybe competing for food, and because their food was limited, their resources were limited, and they were forced to live together when they wouldn't naturally do so in the wild. Their behaviour was then observed, and basically of all the behaviour that they observed, they recorded 2% of it. So this 2% reflected the society mood for them at the time, and fit into what they already believed wolves should be like as big, powerful, strong animals. And that society belief is obviously that everything happens by force, and there's one supreme leader who's forced his way to the top of the pack. Now, the reality is, while these wolves were forced to live with restrictions, so they were unrelated, they're forced to compete for their resources, there are going to be fights and aggression and outbursts. But this is not in an attempt to obtain status. It's in an attempt to survive. So the observations, as I said, match the mood at the time, but it wasn't a complete scientific study as you would hope to see. If somebody told you that they have a cure for cancer and they've only cured 2% of their patients, then that would not be a cure for cancer. So if somebody tells you that a wolf or a dog is dominant, they're basing it on bad science. And we've changed a lot in what we know about wolves and wolf behaviour since that period of time, as well as dog behaviour, which again is separate. So the term alpha, for example, again another popular term to use. You've got to be the leader of the pack. You've got to be the alpha dog. The term alpha in relation to pack animals was coined by in a book called Wolf by a gentleman called David L. Meach. And he's a world-renowned wildlife researcher, biologist, and wolf expert. And basically the term implies that wolves nut out a pecking order through fighting and competition until one of them gets to the top. The reality is, however, that David L. Meach has said himself, we've learned a lot in the last 40 years. He has a video on YouTube, and that explains to us that actually the term alpha isn't used in scientific circles anymore.
The term alpha isn't really accurate when describing most of the leaders of wolf packs because the term implies that the wolves fought and competed strongly to get to the top of the pack. In actuality, the way they get there is merely by mating with a member of the opposite sex, producing a bunch of offspring, which are the rest of the pack then, and becoming the natural leaders that way, just like with a pair of humans producing a family. Actually, I'm very much to blame for the term alpha being used with wolves. I published a book in 1970 that now has over 110,000 copies in circulation, and in that I labeled the top wolf in the pack the alpha. And I did that because at that time that's all that science knew. But we've learned a lot. That book was published in 1970, and in the 35 years since that time, we've learned an awful lot. One of the things we've learned is that the term alpha is really incorrect when applied to most wolf pack leaders.
So if we know that a wolf doesn't become a leader of a wolf pack by fighting it out, how does a wolf become a leader of a wolf pack? It's really quite easy. Mum and dad wolf hook up, and they have puppies, and that's all it needs. Now mum and dad are leaders of a wolf pack. That's all it is. It's just like our family. When there's mum and dad, I guess with us up until a certain age, and with a wolf up until they're pushed out of their pack, mum and dad are in charge because they actually know how the world works. We can look to them and follow them for guidance and advice because they've been there before. And that's exactly how you become a leader of a wolf pack. You might have a couple of set of cubs, so you have your first set, they're going to help you raise the second set, and that's all there is to it. It's not very tricky. The problem then becomes for us as dog owners is that the ideas about wolves and how wolves live are somehow immediately used to discuss dog behaviour.